In this video, I'd like to share with you an idea of playing in the center and how can your activity in the center facilitate your attack all over the board, including the king side. I feel that it's one of the concepts that people don't fully understand. Like, most everyone heard that it's good to play in the center, but they don't always realize exactly how it's gonna help them checkmate an opponent's king. Let's find out. Here's the position from the European Championship between Boinch and Mayweld. Maybe I don't pronounce their names properly. Anyway, it's white to play. And what do you think about this? Is there any way for white to attack opponent's king? Well, it would be fairly difficult to do so. As you can see, most of the white's pieces are quite far away from the king. The king is also well protected by the surrounding pieces. Trying to open up the position there would require massive effort, because pushing your pawns would also weaken your king, and it's still not easy. Sacrificing pieces for those pawns also don't look like a feasible option. All in all, it seems like there is no clear way how white can possibly attack that king. But if we just think in general, how can white attack in this position? We know that the idea is to look at opponent's half of the board and ask yourself, how can I move my forces there to attack or take something? And with that in mind, you may come to the move pawn to e5, which is indeed the way to begin your attack in the center. Now, here you may notice an interesting thing. White may do this thanks to his advantage in the center. White has two pawns, d4 and e4, while black has none of his pawns in the central squares d5 and e5, which provides white with this advantage in the center. And the good thing about it is that anytime white wants to launch his attack, he may just push one of his pawns forward. This will help him to make this important shift from white's territory of the board into the black's territory of the board, which is the mark of a beginning of your attack. And the great thing for white is that he does not even have to sacrifice pieces or pawns or create some, pawn assault and take a lot of time to prepare it. No, white can begin his attack with just one move. And it happens thanks to his advantage in the center. That's why it's so important for you to try to have advantage in the center. In this position, white actually played e5 right away. And it's a good thing because it pushes that knight away. Black first captured the pawn. And here, even though he could take the pawn, but he refused to do so, if black would actually take the pawn, it would help white to open up even more lines. And he can first take this knight and then play bishop f3. And now all of a sudden there are so many threats. There is this pawn under attack. There is also some potential discovered attack of the black's queen. The white's bishop can take on h6 or maybe on a7. There are so many opportunities. And it happens because in order to begin your attack, we need to open up the position first, which is exactly what happens right here. That's why black did not want to go into the position like this. Instead, here at this point, he just moved his knight back to g8, which is certainly an accomplishment for white. Pushing your opponent's pieces away backwards is always a good thing for you. White continued. He played pawn to e6. It's a sacrifice of the pawn, but it totally destroys the black's pawn structure, creating lots of weaknesses that white can attack later on. And he plays bishop d3 now. Now this bishop takes aim possibly at the g6 weak pawn and somewhat to the black's king. Black played bishop f6. White continued with bishop to e4. Notice that thanks to the white central pawns, which white had there in the past, and now he sacrificed them, he somewhat also has more free space to maneuver his pieces. While most of the black's pieces are just situated on the last ranks, for white it's much easier to operate and to move his pieces forward. Currently, with his last move bishop to e4, he prepares the tactical shot knight takes b5, winning the pawn and taking advantage of the pin. In order to prevent this, black decided to eliminate the knight. He took bishop takes c3, which turned out to be a sudden mistake, because black, for a moment, moved his bishop away from the king side, and white decided to take advantage of this opportunity right away. He jumped knight to g5 check, and it actually wins the game right away, because now if pawn takes the knight, which happened in the game, white has a great move queen to h5. Since the pawn is pinned by the white's bishop from e4 by the white's light-squared bishop, black can't really take the queen. Or otherwise his king is going to be checkmated after queen takes g6, king h8, and queen to h7. This game just shows you how you can begin an attack in the center whenever you wish to do so in case you have an advantage in the center. And from there onwards, you can attack all over the board, whether you wish to attack opponent's pawns or even to shift your attack to the king. But anyway, it's important to pay this thing in mind. It's always a great thing to have a strong center. It's going to facilitate your attack a lot. Here's another game. Do you have an idea of how can white attack here? A lot of players would focus their attention on the king side solely, and they would only think about pushing the h-pawn forward and placing the bishop there to h6 and trying to checkmate the opponent's king this way. Even though it is a possible plan, it is actually usually stronger to attack in the center. Center has the dominant power in the game. The centralized pieces are the most powerful, and if you have the dominance, it means that you will win for sure, sooner or later, one way or the other. And that is why white played pawn to e5. It kind of may, remind you the previous game we have just watched. Similar idea, white crossed the half of the board by pushing his central pawn forward to e5, taking the knight and starting to create some problems for black. In case black takes the pawn, this would probably just help white, because white recaptures and black still has to move his knight away, while it also helps white to somewhat start pressuring black along this d file. That's why in the real game, instead of taking the pawn, black just moved his knight back right away. Notice that by pushing the pawn to e5, white also attacked that pawn on d6, which is attacked simultaneously by the pawn and the bishop, and that's why the knight had to go backward to protect it. And now white continued his attack. He played knight to e4. Again, thanks to the white's advantage in the center, it also gives white more space. He has this active bishop on f4, active knight on e4, which already starts attacking black, while the black's pieces are cramped, they have to stand on the last ranks. Black played queen to c7 to protect the pawn, but there white found an interesting tactical opportunity. First of all, he took the pawn, and here all of a sudden he took the pawn anyways, because after black recaptures, white can play queen b4, and taking advantage of the pin, white can win this pawn. So basically on the next move, white will play bishop takes d6, winning the knight, and he just won the pawn. There was a long game after that. It's a game between two club players. They made a lot of mistakes down the road, and the game was drawn after all. But anyway, at this moment, white certainly has an advantage. And it just again shows you how easily you can begin an attack in the center. Finally, sometimes people wonder why to attack pawns if the purpose of the chess game is to checkmate opponent's king. The answer is pretty straightforward. It's not always possible to checkmate opponent's king right away. Often it's a lot more achievable to first of all capture some material, pawns or pieces, and then, having this advantage, having greater army than your opponent has, you can then begin a decisive attack. Here's the game between Sutovsky and Van Velde. It's white's turn here, and in this position it was fairly interesting to notice how white's space advantage, and in particularly his strong position in the center, allowed him to bring his pieces to the king side so quickly. He started by playing bishop to d3, which is usually a powerful position for the bishop for attack on the king side, because it starts looking towards black king. And on the next move, after black played rook to e8, white played queen h5. And here just pay attention to the fact how easy it was for white to bring his queen so close to opponent's king. For instance, if black would try to somehow bring his queen closer to the king to protect it, there is just no way, right? Because white controls so many squares on the chessboard. And because black is lacking space for his maneuvers, he has a very hard time bringing his queenside pieces to help his king. Anyway, let's see what happened next. Black played g6, trying to kick the queen away. It went back to h4. Black played b4, knight went back to e2. In a way, b4 did not really help black too much, because this knight actually gets closer to the king side, so in the future it can possibly take part into the attack there, so maybe it was not even the best for black to play b4. He played bishop b7, white continued rook f3. Now he's gonna play rook h3 and then checkmate the black's king there. Again, kind of maneuver like this is only possible due to the fact that white has so much space. Black played h5. White continued with knight to g3. He's preparing to sacrifice the knight there to open up the position on the king side. Black played bishop f8. He's desperately trying to bring at least some pieces closer to his king, but in fact this bishop is the only piece he can really bring up easily. White sacrificed the knight to open up the position there, to remove the cover of the black's king. Queen h5, black plays bishop g7. Here there were like different ways for white to continue. He pushed the pawn to f5. Again, I hope that by now these kind of moves already seem so natural for you. When you attack, you need to move forward, you need to open up the position by pushing your pawns forward, and this is exactly what white is doing here. Black recaptured, which helped white to bring the knight also closer to the king. Black played knight f8. White took knight takes g7, another common idea for your attack to eliminate defenders. Usually, especially if your opponent has very few defenders, if you just eliminate one of them, that opponent simply becomes defenseless, such as in this position. Mainly the king is protected by the bishop and the knight, and therefore if you can eliminate one of those pieces, really the king will become so lonely that it won't help him to survive for too long. So white took the bishop, there played bishop d4 check. Black tried to cover the diagonal by playing rook e5, even though white could take the rook, but he can do it anyway at any time, so he played rook f1 instead, threatening rook takes f7, and black is defenseless. He simply resigned at this point. It seems like the white's attack was so quick and so easy, and, well, it is actually true. And it happened due to the fact that it was so easy for white to bring all of his pieces into the attack, while for black it took a lot longer to try to somehow regroup his pieces to bring them closer to the king, while those pieces on the queen side are still somewhat off the game. They don't really help black at all. And that's another great advantage of having a strong center, that it provides you the space that you need to maneuver your pieces and to bring them closer to the opponent's king whenever you decide to begin your attack. And here is the final game of this lesson between Korneev and Dyczkov, two grandmasters, I think. It is white to play, and he started his attack. Whenever you need to start your attack, you need to look at opponent's half of the board and think how you can play there and hopefully take or attack something there. In this case, there is no way for white to immediately capture something which would give him advantage, so he just played forward knight to g5. This knight comes closer to the opponent's king. Potentially it may go to e6 somewhere in the future, immediately or after, first of all, eliminating that bishop from f5 sometime in the future. Even more so, it possibly prepares the white's pawn to g4 move, which would help white to eliminate this bishop and also to push it all the way back somewhere to d7. That's why black played queen to c8, trying to prevent this g4 move from happening, but white played bishop e2, and now this move is unavoidable. Black tried playing c6 to create at least some space for his pieces, but nevertheless white played g4, continuing his plan. The bishop has to go all the way back, and now queen d3, white can start the direct attack of opponent's king. And there is here an interesting thing you may notice. If you just look at the position overall, you may notice that the white center, the white strong position in the center, and in particular that pawn on d5, serves as a nail that fixates white's advantage, as a separator, because it somewhat blocks the black's pieces. All these black's pieces that are stuck on the queen side are extremely hard to be delivered somewhere to the king side, for instance, and it is because the center is blocked by the white's pawn chain. And because these pawns are advanced, they provide enough free space for white to maneuver his pieces whatever he wants, and in particular to also bring his queen forward. Black tried king d8 to escape with his king, and white played another good move, pawn to c5. When we want to attack the centralized king, we need to open up the lines, and that's exactly what white is doing right here by pushing his pawn forward to c5. And yeah, actually it's already time to resign. Let's say black would take with the knight. White can just trade off the knight first, and then there are actually a lot of opportunities for white to continue his attack. I guess that one of the easiest options would be simply to push his pawn forward to d6, continuing the same strategy of opening more and more lines against the black's king. And then, if black takes, white certainly recaptures, and he's creating those threats of knight to f7, knight to e6. He can certainly bring the rook to d1, and yeah, it's just time to resign for black, really. In this position, there are so many threats that white has: knight to e6 check, knight f7, rook can go to d1, and black is absolutely defenseless. This game just showed you also those few typical ideas that helps you to start your attack in the center, and then it provides you with a couple of options. Anytime you want, you can push your central pawn forward, which will help you to open up more lines and to start attacking your opponent. Also, it provides you with more free space to regroup your pieces to bring them closer to the opponent's king, while at the same time it blocks opponent's pieces out, and it makes it very difficult for him to bring up his reserves to support his king. These were the main strategies for you to attack in the center, and from there onwards you can either continue in attacking there or to shift your attack to the king side. But I hope that by now it became clear to you why is this so important to play in the center, why all the opening tutorials tell you control the center, play in the center. It's because there are so many of advantages that it can provide to you down the road and can help you facilitate your attack in the future.